So welcome everyone to our little mini session on avoiding an always urgent workplace culture. My name's Grace Marshall. I'm one of the productivity ninjas at Think Productive, and I'm joined by my colleague Hayley. Hayley, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm also one of the productivity ninjas at Think Productive.
Brilliant. And I'm gonna give a little shout out to our books as well. Because we were both shortlisted in the Business Book Awards, in the UK Business Book Awards last week. So Hayley's book, How to Fix Meetings, that you co-wrote with Graham Alcott. Which category was that? Was that people, culture and management?
Leadership and management, I think.
Fantastic. And my book, Struggle, was shortlisted in the work and life category. So yeah, we're in celebrations mode. Oh, thanks so much. Fantastic. Well, so what we're here to talk about today is avoiding an always urgent workplace culture. So, it feels like we live in a fast-paced, ever-changing world where everyone feels connected 24/7, and there seems to be this expectation and pressure to respond immediately, to jump on things, to kind of have this sense of instant response. And as a result of that, it's tempting to treat every request, every communication as though it's urgent. So in this session, what I want to do is to share with you 5 questions that I use and that I share with other teams to help explore, how urgent does it need to be? And, does faster always mean better? Well, actually, where does it get in the way of us doing our best work, and how can we do about it? So these are 5 questions that you can use for yourself. There are also 5 questions that you can maybe use to start a conversation with your colleagues, with your team, and something that you can take away and use with them. So I'm going to just start with, this is not one of those questions. This is going to be a poll. Hayley's going to get a poll going on our screen in a minute. And it's just to ask, what's your relationship with urgency in your workplace? So how urgent is your work? Hayley, are you able to, excellent. Yeah, how urgent is your work, your world of work, your workplace? Is it always urgent? Is it often urgent? Is it sometimes urgent? Or is it never urgent? And if you want to tell us more, give us a little bit more information on that, feel free to type into the chat. Maybe you're a firefighter, or maybe you work in emergency services and your work is always urgent by definition, or maybe it's something else.
I can see most of you have voted. There's still a few more votes to come in. People are still casting their votes. So just give people a moment or two. Interesting point from Michelle there. My clients or partners work urgently, and that impacts on my department and my role. So very often it's other people's urgent, isn't it, that kind of creates that urgency for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the pandemic's definitely created its own a variety of urgency, pandemic response and things like that. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so sometimes, like Teresa's point about dealing with potential and existing customers around their home building projects, so they do like being responded to. It's like in their world, it's a really urgent thing.
And I like Catherine's comment as well. She says, quite often, I'm not sure, but assume I'm being asked to do something urgently. So Catherine's hit the nail on the head there. She's kind of assuming that, and that sounds like it's a little bit of a thought or reflection that maybe it's not.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to end the poll now. I think most people have voted. Let's share those results.
Oh, okay. So most people are saying often. We've got a good number are saying always, and some people are saying sometimes as well. And yeah, it's always interesting, isn't it? So I don't think we do have anyone who works directly in emergency services, but definitely there's a sense of urgency that we all feel, whether explicitly, implicitly, a lot of the time, for sure. Okay, brilliant. So let's have a look at these 5 questions then. The first one is, what does good work actually look like? What does good work look like in your world of work, in your role, in the kind of work that you do? This is actually a question that we share in our Productivity Ninjas Guide to Hybrid Working, because and it's a question that applies to hybrid working, but also it's a really good question to ask however you're working, wherever you're working, because often we associate productivity with busyness. We associate it with that kind of picture on the right, the super busy person who looks like they're being really, really in demand. And in an office, that might look like looking across an office and going, oh yeah, there's lots of really busy people working here. Okay, everyone's being productive. And then in the hybrid world of work, maybe, or remote working, it might look like lots of meetings happening, lots of emails flying around. In fact, I was running a session this week around meetings, and somebody shared that it was with a session of managers, and somebody shared that they felt like their team were putting lots of meetings in the diary to show how busy they were, to show how productive they were being. And so it's really good to ask this kind of question, like, what does good work actually look like? So given the kind of work I do, where do I actually add value? And what does that look like? Because a lot of us are knowledge workers, which means that we add value with the thinking that we do, the ideas that we have, the decisions that we make. So maybe the guy on the left there, our sort of monk mode, might actually be what productive looks like, because we're doing that deep thinking. Or it might be relationship building. It might be the quality of our relationships, and it might be spending time actually listening and paying full attention to somebody, rather than being distracted by emails pinging in when you've got your one-to-one with them. Or it could be actually innovation. Maybe that's where we add value. It's the ideas, the creativity that comes in. What does that actually look like as well? And if we don't think about it that way, what we can do is often default into thinking that speed is how we measure how good our work is or how productive we are. And then sometimes that can look like the people who look the busiest get rewarded, that the people who maybe stay the longest or work the hardest or reply to emails really quickly, that those are the people being really productive. So it's worth thinking about, like, what's my mindset around this? But also on a team level or an organization level, what do we actually measure and what do we reward? Because sometimes people can talk about, and I've had, Hayley, you can tell me if you've had conversations like this as well, but I've had conversations with people where they go, well, yes, we don't want our people working all hours. We want them to take breaks. We don't want them working late. But then actually the people who get rewarded are the ones who maybe have been working late. Do you see that too, Hayley?
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of that depends on the leaders and organizations, right? Somebody's saying, well, we do want you to take breaks. We don't want you to work at the weekend. And then they go and do that themselves. It kind of detracts from the message. So if you are in a leadership role, this is a really important place in which to lead by example, I think, for sure.
Yeah. And I think the more clarity you can give around this, the better, because we all have our default positions. And the default position historically has been more the busyness picture. And so it takes a little bit more explicit clarification to go, no, this is what I want to see you doing.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, Grace, but very often when people do our one day How to Be Productivity Ninja workshop, people will sit back and say, the problem is I don't have enough thinking time. The reason I'm feeling busy, the reason I feel overwhelmed, I feel overloaded, is I'm not making time to just take a step back and think about, what are the problems? What might the solutions be? How do I think or feel about this thing that I have in front of me?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So asking that is definitely a good question to ask. Second question, is this urgent or is it important? The two are not the same. So this is a question that we often bring up as a discussion point when we run our Leading Hybrid Teams workshop. So that's where we're working with leaders, with managers, around what does it look like to kind of lead our teams in a hybrid world. And this kind of sense of, is it actually urgent or is it important? And so often people go, it's both, it's urgent and it's important. Problem is, when everything's urgent, nothing is. But also when we treat everything as urgent, we only give it reactive attention. And that's maybe not the kind of deep focused, proactive attention that might help us to do it really well. So if it's urgent, it needs to be done right now. if it's important, it needs to be done right. It needs to be done well. So maybe there's more thought that needs to go into it. And sometimes we get the two mixed up as well. So imagine if somebody really important sends you an email. How often do you react to that with urgency? So sometimes it's like, oh, it's a VIP. I better get back to them quickly. Do we really need to get back to them quickly? Sometimes we might have to, sometimes we might not, but sometimes we just default and jump into, oh gosh, that's someone really important, better get back to them quickly. And then I think, also it comes down to if things are urgent and important, then it's a trade-off. We're going to have to make a trade-off between quality and speed. And we can't do things to the same quality fast all the time. So really thinking about kind of what is the balance of this? How much of my time do I spend in that sort of reactive mode dealing with urgent stuff? How much time do I spend in proactive mode dealing with the important stuff? Do I get the two mixed up? Or do I leave all the important stuff until it becomes urgent, and then I'm having to react to it, but maybe not giving it the depth of thought that it requires? What do you think about this, Hayley? And I'd love to know what other people think about this as well. So feel free to kind of add your examples in the chat there.
Yeah, head to the chat and tell us. And I think one of the difficult things about this is people often feel reluctant to ask. You can ask a client, is this urgent? You need me to do it quickly? Is it important? You want me to take a bit more time and do it well? And I think that's a really good way to use the line management structure to get some clarity around this. Somebody mentioned earlier, I tend to think if somebody is asking me to do something, it's urgent, but we can ask and we can find out.
Yeah, great point.
Yeah, and Joanne's got the quote there in the chat: your emergency does not become my priority. The impact of other people's poor planning. Yeah, for sure. Sarah's scheduling some thinking time each week, but that often gets bumped for and she's put it in inverted commas, urgent work. Yeah,
absolutely.
And Lucy shared, we often have it's urgent and important, which mainly equals panic, stress, and longer hours. Love the idea of a reality check of the trade-off conversation. Yeah, definitely.
Cool.
And Wendy's had a good experience there, getting an extension by kind of asking that question. So that's great. And when we start talking about and engaging with these types of issues with our colleagues and our clients, whoever they might be, I think that drives the quality and helps us come to the right conclusion.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that sort of sense of like, oh, I really, I schedule my own thinking time, but then that gets bumped for something more urgent. That's a really interesting one. And that's worth checking as well. Is it actually urgent, as in it really needs to be tended to right now as an emergency? Or is it more just that it distracted me, and so therefore I feel like I need to react to it? Because that's part of us as human beings as well, is that when we're distracted, we kind of want to, it creates an open loop in our brain, and we want to close that loop to get that sense of dopamine hit of like, oh, good, that's out of the way now. So yeah, cool. Okay, brilliant. So yeah, some really good examples and discussions there. Number 3, related to this, is what fires are we creating for each other? So something we often talk about in our Way of the Productivity Ninja session is this idea of firefighting. And it's a term that we use a lot in our work, when actually it's nothing to do with physical firefighting. It's just that sense of like panic or crisis or running around like a headless chicken. Actually, pub quiz here. How much time do you think firefighters spend fighting fires? What percentage of their time do you think a professional firefighter actually spends fighting fires? I wonder if anyone knows.
We've got things ranging between kind of 5% and 30%, with lots of guesses in the middle. 0.5% there. Very specific, Alex.
Yeah, so I spoke to somebody local to me in Staffordshire, where I live, and they said it was 10% for them. 10% of their time was spent fighting fires. The other 90% of the time was spent on prevention and education. So it's where they go into universities and give talks and tell students to buy their chips instead of trying to fry it themselves after a night out. It's where they go into the community and do sort of smoke alarm testing and things like that. So it's worth thinking sometimes, if you feel like you're constantly firefighting, like, where can we do some prevention and education? But also internally, what fires are we creating for each other? So as an organization or as a team, are we the ones creating the fires? Are we setting off fires for each other? So sometimes my last minute emergency, if I'm always in reactive mode and I'm always sending stuff to Hayley going, help, then I'm creating a fire. And then that can have a knock-on effect, because then that might mean that Hayley's constantly in reactive mode, and then other things get left and then they become fires as well. So definitely, how much of the firefighting that we're doing is genuinely needed? How much of it is externally created, but also how much of it is internally created?
And I think it's really good to think about what that fire prevention work looks like in your world and in your team. If you're the person managing the team, then are there particular people that you're working with that create some of your fires? Maybe there's a training need there. Maybe they need a bit more coaching, a bit more support. Maybe it's your clients who create this issue. So just some of that might be about managing expectations and thinking, what could we do to try and prevent that fire happening again next week, next month?
Yeah, and absolutely. And also, like, we work in productivity. So a lot of the people who come to us might be like, I know I should have gotten in touch with you earlier, but like, that's why we need you. And, so sometimes there is a sense of, if your clients are the ones coming to you because the fire's already burning, the temptation can be, we need to jump in and respond in that sort of firefighting mode. But sometimes we can also be the ones who set the pace. Maybe we can be the ones bringing some calm to our clients, rather than kind of reacting with more fires. Yeah, absolutely. And really good point from Joanne. I like that.
Lovely. Yeah,
not all fires need
burning out on their own. Yeah, that's nice.
Definitely.
And I think that happens, doesn't it, when you get back from your leave and you find all your email conversations going on, and people have copied you in or included you, because when they write that email, they think that when you're back next week, you're only going to get involved and help sort out this problem. But by the time you arrive back, it's ancient history and it's all happened and things have moved on.
Absolutely. Sometimes if you leave your emails alone for long enough, the work goes away.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Question number 4 then. How fast is good? So often we think the faster the better, right? But actually that's not always true. So how fast does good look like? But also, how fast is too fast? So I'd love to know, when have you found yourself working too fast, and what has been the result of that? What has been the impact of trying to get something done too quickly or responding too quickly?
Word mistakes is appearing a lot, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, doing it twice, making mistakes.
Mm.
And Chloe shared their emotional responses to emails. I'm sure we've all been there.
Yes. Yeah, I'm responding too quickly to this because I'm emotional about it, and actually what comes through is just all the emotion rather than anything else. I described this the other day to someone as the Harry Potter howler. The howlers that come through in Harry Potter. And I remember being on the receiving end of something like that. It was like all capitals in my inbox, and there was definitely an emotional response there.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that there's a really good point just been made in the chat around, if you wait to respond, otherwise you're setting an expectation around response times. So if you respond within a couple of minutes, people then start expecting that from you. So you create that pressure for yourself and that expectation for yourself.
Absolutely. It becomes a race to the bottom.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a funny one actually, because sometimes we have that perception that if we don't respond quickly enough, that people will think less of us. But the example I sometimes give people is, if you imagine your favorite restaurant, or like maybe your dentist, I don't know if your dentist is like this, but mine is, that like you have to really book ahead. You can't get a last minute appointment with them.
Yeah.
And so, actually sometimes, if we try and book our favorite restaurant and we can't get it last minute, you're like, oh, okay, I'm disappointed first off, but my perception of them isn't that, like, that devalues what they do. Actually, the value probably goes up a little bit. It's like, oh, I need to book ahead because it's so in demand. So there is maybe something around that perception of not responding too quickly and not creating that expectation that you're always going to be jumping on it straight away.
And very often in workshops, if I say to somebody, well, if you send an email, how long do you think it's going to take for somebody to respond to you? And they'll normally talk in terms of hours, maybe a day. And then I'll say to people, well, what about when you receive an email? And they start talking about minutes. So what we expect as a response is much more generous in the time allowance given to it than perhaps the expectation people have of how long they should take to respond to things.
Definitely. Yeah, and some really good stuff coming through on the chat. So the fact that actually sometimes we cause confusion. There's less clarity if we're responding too quickly. Sometimes there's misunderstanding because we haven't read it properly. I've definitely done that. I've done it too quickly and go, oh no, I haven't read the whole thing and I haven't understood it properly. And sometimes that can turn into the sort of email ping pong, that 20 emails later you realize, gosh, not only could we have had a better conversation if we would have done this calmly or maybe over the phone, but actually we've been having two completely different conversations, just kind of replying so quickly. So sometimes the quality of our work can suffer. Sometimes the quality of our relationships can suffer as well. So when we become, when we have that email rage, when we become emotional, or when we haven't really understood or taken the time to understand, or when we maybe haven't read between the lines and we're just responding to what someone is saying rather than thinking, hang on, what's really going on here? What's the question beneath the question that's being asked? Definitely, loads of things coming through there. Question number 5. Is this an emergency or is it just a surprise? So our lizard brain is something that we talk about in quite a few of our workshops, actually. And it's something I talk about a lot in my book, Struggle. Is basically the primitive part of our brain that is responsible for keeping us alive. It's a part of our brain that activates the fight or flight stress response. And it does that, basically, whenever there's a life-threatening situation, it's going, whoa, you've got to react straight away. Because, if there is a bear charging down the street at me, I need to know, like, do I pick up something and defend myself? Or do I run away and hide and make myself safe? The problem is most of the things that our lizard brain responds to these days isn't a life-threatening situation, but it still responds in that same way. It still responds in the way of like, quick, do something. And so sometimes when you get something in your inbox that you weren't expecting, it's like, that's a surprise. But sometimes our lizard brain jumps into, that's a threat. I need to do something about it straight away. And so sometimes what we do is we react to something as an emergency when actually it was just a surprise. I just wasn't expecting it. And that's why, there's a part of me that feels like I need to do something about it straight away, but that's my lizard brain talking. So tell me if you relate to this or not. Go on, Hayley.
There's also part of our brains, I think, that the new and shiny, oh, this has just come up, let me get involved with that. It sounds interesting. It sounds exciting. A lot of people say, I'm really good at starting projects, not so good at finishing them off. Getting started feels kind of easier, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, do head to the chat. Tell us what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I've definitely been caught out by this myself. There have been times where I know a colleague has sent something that I wasn't expecting to see, and I go, whoa. And then I can't, it's almost like I'm drawn in and I get that tunnel vision of like, this is how I feel about it. Okay, I'm going to react straight away. And then you've got like sort of emotional side of things, as well as I was supposed to be doing something else right now.
Yeah, so sometimes these things they're distractions, right? Rather than emergencies. Yeah.
Mm,
And
yeah.
Suzanne said that it can be a convenient distraction.
It could be something appealing and attractive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A new small task is attractive when you're in the middle of a big task, because you can put a big tick next to it on your list, and that feels satisfying, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely, Sarah. This is where turning off email helps. Yeah.
Big fans.
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. If you're in the middle of something, when you know, like, okay, I'm more susceptible to distraction here, just turn off your emails. Don't give it that opportunity to arrive. And let's face it, if it was genuinely emergency, they'd probably find a way of getting hold of you. Cool. What else is coming through on the chat, Hayley?
So yeah, this happens with instant messaging more than email. The same logic kind of applies. You don't have to be in there all day, every day. Steph says turning off emails was revolutionary for me. So maybe you can use your status for those instant messages to kind of communicate to people when you'll be available, when's a good time to get hold of you. Somebody else is sharing there that they work in the travel industry. They keep getting hit by waves of flight cancellations. Everybody goes into panic mode, but we need to wait and see what the situation is before we react. They'll still be cancelled tomorrow.
Really good point, Ellie.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And so some of this is kind of just noticing that lizard brain and recognizing, no, this is part of being human. Our lizard brain will jump in, but I don't need to act on it. It doesn't need to take the driving seat. I can go, okay, I acknowledge that. I understand where the panic instinct is coming from, but I don't need to follow that through.
Yeah. We've got there, since COVID, I think some people have forgotten how to use the phone. I was due to speak to somebody the other day, and I asked them if they'd prefer a phone call or a Zoom meeting. And they said, I couldn't do a phone call. That would be too much like going back to the 80s. Whereas I work with somebody else on a fairly regular basis. And she said, I always prefer the phone because I can stand up and I can stretch. And she has an injury that she's kind of trying to recover from. So for her, standing up, doing some stretching while she's on the phone feels good and allows her to move, and that's good for her.
Yeah, definitely.
So different things work for different people. Like, talk to each other, talk to the people that you work with, and find out a bit more about what works for different people.
Absolutely. Yeah, so those are our 5 questions. What does good work look like? Is it urgent or important? What fires are we creating for each other? How fast is good? And how fast is too fast? And then, is this an emergency or is it just a surprise? So that's our invitation for you, really, is to take these questions, use it for yourself, maybe write it on a post-it note if you need reminding of it at different times, but also maybe take it into your team meetings, maybe start a conversation with your colleagues, and maybe see get that kind of into their psyche as well as yours. So we've got some time in a minute to take some questions, so feel free to get your questions coming in. You can pop it into the chat, you can pop it into the Q&A if you want to. Hayley will keep an eye out on both of those. But I'd also love to know what you're taking away from this session. So maybe which of these questions is standing out most to you, or what you're going to do with it, who might you have that conversation with? Is there one particular area of this that you would want to dive into a little bit more? So tell us what you're going to do with this, because none of this works if we don't put it into action. So we're always very keen to get you thinking about what are your takeaways and what are your actions, and also what are your questions, because we're here for another 15 minutes to answer your questions.
We've got a great question here. What tips do you have if your line manager... Ooh. Yeah, you can tell it's going to be a good one. It just disappeared then. Some more comments came in. What tips do you have if your line manager works in this always urgent way?
Great question. Maybe use some of these conversations with them. So in your one-to-one, it might be asking, what does good work look like to you? What are the outcomes? And get them to start focusing on outcomes, because they might start focusing on like, I want to see you doing this and what the activity looks like. But if you can start to maybe shift the conversation to what are the outcomes you want to see from me, and then maybe start talking about, okay, which of those bits are urgent? which of those bits are important. Is it okay for me to take a step back? Or maybe letting them know that actually when you're less available, that's when you're really 100% kind of deep focus, and it's going to help you to be able to respond that way. It's also worth just double checking with them, like if are they always urgent? and maybe talking about that trade-off conversation as well. Like, do you want me to, how which of these things do you want me to dive deep on? And in that case, would it be possible to get more of a lead time on that? Yeah, so those are some of my initial thoughts. What do you think, Hayley?
I think this also relates to the point somebody made earlier around like somebody's lack of planning being their emergency. So is that what's going on? So how might you be more proactive about that? Can you go to that person and say, look, I'm trying this new thing. You can blame me because this productivity ninja suggested that we do this. I really want to plan what work I'm doing this week. What do you need from me this week? So you're encouraging them to think about what they need from you in advance. And you might not get much back the first time, but if you keep doing it each week, you're probably going to start to get a bit more of a response on that.
Yeah.
There's some really lovely stuff coming through in the chat. I'm going to try and pull out the questions. If you have got any specific questions, feel free to pop those in the Q&A, and we will find them in the chat as well. A few people really liking the urgent versus important. Is it an emergency or a surprise? Resonated with a few people. Somebody else saying, oh, I didn't realize that I might be the person creating fires. So that's kind of something to reflect on. Yeah.
And it happens because we have this culture of speed. We have this culture where it's like we think, oh, the faster the better. So so sometimes we end up getting so caught up in it, we perpetuate that culture as well. So really good to have that self-awareness.
And somebody else there saying, I think my team are very focused on putting out fires for clients, which means they create fires for each other. So there's another trade-off there, isn't there? Where are we going to put the fire?
Yeah, definitely.
So thinking about what that fire prevention work looks like, I think would be really good there.
Yeah, and having that team conversation, because actually firefighters do tend to work as teams, don't they?
Yeah. And this is a lovely comment. Love the lizard brain explanation. Very relatable, and I think it will help me chill a bit. So great, our work here is done. Like that's awesome.
Absolutely.
So lots of people are going to change the way they're dealing with or responding to emails. Somebody else sharing there's something quite addictive about working at pace. And yes, there's something. Our brains release hormones. You get a message to say, whether it's an instant message or an email or a ping on your phone, like you get a dopamine hit from that. That is kind of addictive, isn't it? So that there's something that the chemistry kind of setting us up there to really struggle with that stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I really like Lucy's comment as well to say, sometimes I find when you're realistic and fair and you say to someone, this is not urgent, but the deadline is this, sometimes it gets ignored, and because they're maybe focusing on all the fires that need fighting, and so we can end up perpetuating that culture of like, oh, I'm trying to go more long term, but it feels like everyone else is against me. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that and recognize that when we're shifting culture, it can be hard and it can be messy and it's not going to be perfect straight away, but also it's definitely worth it. So maybe get a few more people on board with you on that, Lucy, and keep it going. It's not going to be a one fix solution. It's going to be a journey that you take step by step, and it'll be a squiggly journey as well. It won't be a straight line thing,
but keep trying.
And you're right, it's definitely important to try and change it.
Another one that relates to culture is Suzanne's comment about giving yourself permission to slow down might have a positive effect on colleagues or the culture. So thinking about what the culture comes from our behaviours, doesn't it, and our expectations. So if we can communicate, if we're changing those behaviours and expectations, I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, and even just that, like, okay, let's take a breath here. Like that slow down, take a breath. Biologically, that really helps, because when we're in lizard brain mode, we're breathing shallow, and we get tunnel vision. It's like, I just need to figure out how to fight or take flight. Like that's literally what I'm looking for. Whereas when we can stand down that lizard brain mode, that's when we can think more creatively. We can see a wider vision. We can see more possibility, more nuance. We can focus more on building relationships rather than fighting anybody. It's our human brain that does our best work. The kind of work that we as human beings are really good at doing, the kind of work that is hard to replicate with robots and AI. And so, future-proofing your work probably means, okay, giving ourselves that space to stand down the lizard brain and to kind of activate our full human brain again.
We've got a lovely question here. When you have multiple clients sending requests, how do you manage expectations that you are not only working with them?
Oh, great question. I remember years ago, I spotted somebody's out of office auto response that would get sent, not just when they were on holiday, but just all the time. And it was something along the lines of, it was quite fun. It was kind of like, years of eating too many sweets has given me like a really hyperactive brain or something. I'm really easily distracted. But also what they said was, in order to do your work well, or in order to produce great work for our clients, I switch my emails off from time to time so that I can get that deep focus. And so what that means is, I may not be at my computer right now to respond to your email because I might be working on client work. But what I will promise you is I'll get back to you within this amount of time. So I think there's good ways of signaling, like, just because I'm not replying to you straight away doesn't mean I don't care. It might mean I'm working on your work, or it might be I'm working on client work generally. So so maybe a little bit around that, so some wording around that, but also maybe being proactive about communicating. Look, if you want to get hold of us, here are the channels to use, and here's the expected response time. That's something we do a lot of in our Supercharger Team Comms workshop. Is we work with internal communications, but you could also then use that and take it on to kind of external communications and expectation setting.
And I think that bit around, just because I'm not responding to your email straight away doesn't mean I'm not doing the work. Particularly when it's client facing. I've worked with quite a few organizations where they'll say, but my client expects a response straight away. It's like, actually they don't necessarily. They want you to do a good job. And as pretty much everybody highlighted in the chat earlier, what happens when you do things fast? You make mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. So what our clients want, an element of it is responsiveness and speed and that sort of thing, but also an element of it is reassurance that it's going to be dealt with, that it's off their plate. And another element of it is, actually, I want to know that you're going to do a good job on it. And so it's a whole mixture of things that our clients want, and it's not just speed. Cool. Anything else coming through on the chats?
One is a quick question about the recording for the session today, so that will be available on our YouTube channel in the coming days and weeks. And then we have another observation, which I think is quite a nice one. I find that organizations that have a standard turnaround time, for example, we reply to every email in 24 hours, can lead to a fast but a poor quality response. I don't know if you remember, Grace, you had a client a few years ago now. They were a high street bank, and they did some work with Grace around a lot of this stuff. And then they kind of said, our marketing agency needs this stuff, because they respond really quickly, but then they come back and change their mind, and they work in a different way to us. So we went and did some work with them as well. And that was interesting, because it was the client that was saying, actually, this agency that we're working with, they need some help with this, because they could see it from the client side.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's definitely worth kind of thinking, actually, what helps us to, not just in the short term respond to things quickly, but in the long term, what helps us to deliver our best work. what helps us to make the space for, you know, some of the creativity and innovation that happens that we maybe don't have space to do when we're responding to everything really quickly. And also, you know, what in the long term is going to help us to build our business, our organization, our impact, our team, our relationships. And you know, it is really interesting kind of thinking like, what do we give our time to? If we're always giving 100% of our time to urgent stuff, then actually the short term, there's also often just a short term impact, and we don't get that longer term impact. I have conversations quite regularly with you know, with my husband about kind of how much time do you actually get to spend on things like L&D. You know, so most organizations would say we want to develop you, but actually when it comes to things like timesheets and time codes, you know, is there something that's kind of actually gives people that opportunity to say, look, you've got time to think, you've got time to learn, you've got time to go on training, we expect you to spend some of your time on that, rather than, oh no, you can squeeze that in after you've dealt with all the fires. And by the way, it's always going to be fires.
And the training, the learning can help you to deal with the fires as well, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And help you to recognize which are fires and which aren't as well.
Yeah. There's a comment there shared in the chat around kind of the pace of the work and decision making. Like, you know, you work on something, you put time in, you put effort in, to then find out that the focus of the work has changed, because perhaps the decision making is not at the same pace as the work happening.
Yeah, and again, that often comes from when you've got your head down and you're working on the quick and the immediate, and you're not doing any horizon scanning, not doing any checking in with other people and what's going on wider, and so you get everyone kind of head down in their own silos, working, reacting really quickly. Maybe then you kind of get an email coming in, and that's a surprise, and then you create a whole load of sort of reactiveness there, but nobody's doing the looking together and go, hang on, are all our processes going in the right direction, in the same direction? Are we just creating fires for each other, or are we actually fighting fires and dealing with stuff outside? So there is something about challenging that kind of that tendency to just go head down and keep focusing on the reactive, and maybe getting our head above the parapet, doing some horizon scanning, and and looking a little bit more long term. And again, it's that clearer thinking, isn't it?
And maybe there's a communication piece there. Maybe the person doing the horizon scanning is different to the person doing the work. So being able to say, actually, we're rethinking this. We're not saying don't do that piece of work, but could you just pop that on hold for a moment, is just really kind of thinking about what other people are working on and how your decisions might impact others, if that's part of your role.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've got a few minutes left. Well, maybe a minute left. Yeah. Any further questions from people?
Yeah, so what we'll do is we will, Hayley and I will hang around just for a few more minutes for any sort of unofficial after show questions. That's something we often do, but for those of you who do need to go, what I will say is, if you want more from us, definitely head over to the YouTube channel, because these mini sessions are recorded and available. So if you might have a colleague or that manager who's always urgent, maybe send them to the recording, and maybe that can be the start of a conversation. But also we run in-house workshops as well. So if you'd like us to come and work with you, with your team, or maybe you just want to introduce us to whoever's got the L&D budget to kind of get a conversation going, maybe about your team comms, maybe about working in that hybrid world of working, or just how to work as a productivity ninja, then do get in touch. So Hayley's going to pop our contact details into the chat. I don't know the YouTube channel address off the top of my head, but if you go onto YouTube and Google, search for Think Productive, you'll definitely find that. And do come and find us on LinkedIn as well. We can, come and find us on LinkedIn, send us a connection request, and we can share. Oh, thank you, Gosha. Brilliant. Oh, excellent. How good is that? Fantastic. So we'd love to hear from you. So feel free to come and find us on LinkedIn, connect with us on there, continue the conversation, or come and ask us about working with you a little bit more within your team and within your organization. That was very reactive. Oh, brilliant. Great.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your lovely comments in the chat. If there's any further questions, we will stick around to answer them. Otherwise, go and have a lovely afternoon.
Excellent. Fantastic. So do feel free to pop any other questions or thoughts in the chat or the Q&A session. I'm just going to have a little scroll and see if there's anything we missed.
We've got a handful of people still with us. So if you are like in the middle of typing a question, just, maybe say wait, or and then we'll know that you're about to share.
If you need time, we will take a breather, we will take a break, and we will wait for you. I like the STOMP acronym that Joanne shared earlier.
Yes.
Yeah. So stop, take 5 minutes away from your desk to walk or do something. Take stock, organize your workload, manage your work, negotiate timelines, delegate, say no, praise yourself. I really like that.
I like the P as well. That's really good.
Yeah.
So easy to forget that part.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Somebody was asking me the other day, for some top tips to help them kind of get out of this feeling of sort of burnout and overwhelm. And I'd said, why don't you just, let's start with the to-do list is what I called it. Let's start with just taking stock of like, what have you done and what do you do well? And start with that. And then we can go into what are the things that you need to focus on and work on.
Yeah. I had a conversation with somebody earlier this week who said, look, I just feel really stressed. I'm overloaded. I'm overwhelmed. I haven't had a holiday or a week off in the last 2 years. I was like, that sounds like a better place to start. Like maybe you just need to take a break.
Yes.
You can come back to the other stuff later. 2 years is a long time to have not taken some time off.
And it's been a long 2 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, brilliant. Okay. So I don't know if we do have any other questions or whether people
like it
to see if anyone else asks a question, because that happens as well.
Yeah, we've got 4 people left on the call. So if any of you guys who are here, Alison, Mark or Penny, have got any questions, now's the time to share them. If not, we'll end things. So thank you for joining us.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, everyone. We'll see you again one of these soon.
Thanks, Grace. Bye-bye.
Bye.